Mary walked over to the towering figure that held her enraptured, and the Aian looked down at the little being and marveled. For with his restored eyes and mind, now he could see what she was and how clever the Kuatha had been in creating her. She held up her arms and he leaned down and scooped her up with one strong arm to sit on his hip. Her eyes were bright and curious, and when she smiled and placed her hands on either side of his glowing face, the Aian bowed his head and rested his forehead against hers.
I always knew you were special,
Mary said.
You honor me, Alwanai.
His deep voice rumbled.
I have been waiting a long time to meet you.
Mary frowned at the name he'd called her, and it was as though something in her mind shifted, like she was waking up from a very long dream.
That's my name,
she said, sounding a lot more mature than her 5 years. Shelley stared at her daughter in wonder, for the name the Aian had called her, meaning the one who brings awakening, had ignited a flurry of energy inside her and all through the forest. Birds had started gathering in the trees in larger numbers, and small animals and a couple of deer were approaching the tree line. What was strange was that they were all very still, and their gazes were only for Alwanai. Ben approached the Aian and Alwanai and knelt before them. My heart is singing with joy, he said, and looked up at them with wet eyes. To be alive at this time and see both of you fulfilling your great destinies is an honor that cannot be measured. Shelley knelt beside him.
I agree, and I thank the goddess for her grace and favor.
Alwanai looked down at the Kuatha who had given her life and reached for her, and the Aian gently put her on the ground.
I love you still, Mother,
she said, giving her life-giver a fierce embrace.
Thank you for your sacrifice. The time has come for me to fulfill my sacred duty now. I'm glad you understand, Alwanai.
Shelley held her tighter and felt a sharp ache in her heart. Yes, it was going to be very hard not seeing her daughter's beautiful little face every day. The Aian, now fully inhabiting his vast power, heard the Bagadons closing in. They had no doubt been drawn to their location by the unique energy of Alwanai.
We must get you to the ritual site,
he said, and they walked to the edge of the river. Lowering his staff tip into the water, he raised his other arm and closed his eyes.
Abru Duati Kutana Muath,
he chanted. The water began to change color from frothy white to glowing blue, and then, like a blue dye that had been cast into moving water, the magic flowed towards the thundering waterfall. But instead of falling over the edge, it kept going out in a straight line, and about 2 meters out, it exploded into an undulating circle of blue fire that hovered in midair.
Do not fear the water,
he told them.
it will never harm an elemental.
He looked out across the river.
The Avari are watching over you and will accompany you through the portal.
Alwanai followed his line of sight and saw movement in the tree line. And she smiled in delight and waved in greeting when over 1,000 fluttering Avari emerged and slowly floated out over the river where they stopped. Their gossamer wings beat so fast that Alwanai could only see shiny blurs, and they all waved back at her. One slightly larger Avari continued towards them and came to hover directly in front of her. The tiny being looked male with amber eyes and a narrow face framed by long braided brown hair covered with the tiniest green leaves. And he wore brown feathers with long sleeves and pants and boots beneath a mid-calf split skirt. His large wings were a little larger than him and shone orange and yellow in the dappled sunlight. And in one hand he carried a twisted wooden staff with an amber-green gem set on top.
Greetings, Alwanai,
The Avari said in a surprisingly loud voice for his size.
Hello, Vunatra.
She said.
Thank you for coming.
She extended her arm and the Avari tribal leader alighted on her palm. Shelley, Ben and the Aian bowed their heads and Shelley said,
The Shashas sends her greetings, Vunatra. Thank you for honoring her request.
We have been allies for too long for me to ignore her call for assistance, Princess.
He said. He then leaned over to look behind Alwanai.
And we have come just in time, it seems.
They all turned to look and saw roughly over 100 Bagadons moving towards them through the trees, and their large yellow eyes glinted with menace and disdain. Until they knew exactly what they were up against, though, they would not attack, but their hesitance would not last long.
We must go now.
Vunatra said.
My people and I will keep you afloat above the water, then carry you through the portal when the Shashas opens it.
The Aian placed a big hand on Alwanai's head, and she looked up at him.
I will come after you after I've made sure the Bagadons cannot follow you. Go now and may the goddess grant you courage for what you must do, little one.
The Avari tribal leader flitted a short distance away from them and shouted a command to his people. And with Alwanai between Shelley and Ben, the trio held hands and approached the river's edge. Half the Avari swarm flew towards them and surrounded them, and the next thing their feet left the ground. The buzzing of their wings tickled Alwanai's ears, and she giggled as she was lifted into the air and carried over the frothing water with Shelley and Ben. Shelley could have kept the three of them afloat quite easily, being an air elemental, but she needed to open the portal on their side just before reaching it, and then keep it open long enough for them to all go through. It would take a lot of concentration and strength, and so Sally had handed the task of their safe journey over to the Avari. The Aian's eyes began to glow brighter as he turned to survey the growing number of Bagadons, which were now a mix of those who had transformed back into human form in the town and their brethren who had remained in the forest waiting for the day they began their invasion into human territory. Walking towards the tree line and stopping a couple of meters short, he raised his staff horizontally and spoke a single word.
Jahahaf.
A burst of golden energy tinged with blue began skittering up and down his staff, and turning it vertical again, he hammered it into the ground. A massive shockwave of energy exploded away from the Aian and flattened bushes and snapped branches of trees and sent the birds and animals scattering back into the forest. Fortunately, the surge was directional, so it did not reach the Avari and their charges, but it did knock the Bagadons off their feet and sent them tumbling away from him. Shelley, Ben and Alwanai turned their heads sharply to look and saw the Aian encompassed within his magic and light. It was blinding, so they quickly looked away and noticed that they were now floating directly above the center of the river with their feet facing towards the glowing circle of blue fire.
Take them!
Vunatra shouted above the noise of the river and the screeching of the Bagadons.
We cannot risk our brethren reaching us, and they will try, even if it kills them.
Vunatra had formidable magic, and combined with the magic of his people, they were a force to be reckoned with. But the Bagadons had the advantage of size and numbers, and so could easily overwhelm them if they were determined enough. As the Great Wars had shown them again and again, none of the ancient races were happy with what the Ganthu had done this day, and Vunatra feared that this was the start of another great war. But if the Shashas and Alwanai were successful, it wouldn't get to that point, and so the Avari had committed to doing everything in their power to prevent the Bagadons from reaching them. At this very moment, across the entire world, their people were watching and praying to the goddess that the ritual was a success and that the Bagadons would be driven back once and for all. In truth, they were the last of the true warrior races, and their absence would be welcomed and ensure peace and tranquility for their kind and for all of eternity. The Aian watched the Bagadons stand unsteadily to their feet and shake off the effect of his magic. And this time their growls and hisses and screeches were filled with real hatred. He saw a Bagadon nearest him lower its head with a snarl and prepare to charge him. But before it could, a blinding surge of red light was seen coming towards them at high speed through the trees like a furious slithering snake, and the Aian immediately recognized it for what it was. He spoke a command that ignited his staff, and a glowing wall of light shot out of it to his right and left for at least 100 meters in each direction. Seconds later, the 3-meter-high magical barrier was struck by the red energy in front of him and drove the barrier back a few inches. Only one being had that kind of power. The Ganthu himself had made an appearance, and with a deafening roar, the Bagadons saw their odds improving and charged at the barrier, slamming into it with all their might. The Aian's magic burned their skin and made them shriek and writhe, but they kept coming in wave after wave, pushing him and the barrier back towards the water. And just as he felt his feet getting wet, the towering tribal leader of the Bagadons pushed his way through his brethren and added his magic to their efforts. Red energy battled with the Aian's gold and blue, and straining and grunting against the brutal onslaught, the Aian wondered if he had finally met his match.